Dr. Glenn,
Yes, sir.
I think it'd be fun to speak from a wedding photographer's perspective of what it's like noticing kind of key body language and communication patterns that would denote an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting because that's the ultimate laboratory. And then I could even think back to my wedding too. So I'm having like two things happening at once right now.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Welcome to 12-Week Relationships. This is your place for better relationships in weeks, not years. My name is Pye.
I'm Dr. Glen.
When we say relationships, we mean all of them, starting with the one with yourself and working on outwards towards friends, family, and of course, your, well, partners and love and all of that.
All of it.
All of it.
Yes.
Before we get into this, if you guys would like one-on-one coaching with Dr. Glenn, you can jump onto 12weekrelationships.com. You can join the wait list. I believe you're actually going to be making calls soon for March and April slots coming up, right?
Yeah. So we're this week we're jumping on it right now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And for those that are kind of international and abroad, we do have online coaching that's going to be coming. It's not yet available. We're kind of working on it. We want to make sure it's a really awesome product when it launches. So if you join the newsletter, you can actually keep up on all that, as well as get cool weekly tips. And that's it for our sponsor. We are sponsored by ourselves. And now we're ready to get into this.
Let's do it. Sponsored by no one.
I don't think a lot of our listeners know that, well, I've had several, I guess, different jobs and careers. But it began with, I would say my first career was accounting. And then 2 years into it, after getting my CPA, I became a photographer, specialized in wedding photography. And I actually still do that. I've been doing it for over a decade, and it's something that I still enjoy and I do. But my career as a wedding photographer was a huge, I always reference it as this lab. It was my lab for just observing behavior. Human behavior in context of not only romantic relationships and marriage, but also seeing them interact with their friends, with their family, because I get to be there not only to photograph their engagement, but there on the wedding day when everybody's around them. I get to be in all those moments of planning, and it was just an incredible laboratory. You know what I mean?
No, it makes sense to me why, like when you created your core value method and you're coming, because you're seeing everything right in front of your face and there's nothing that's hidden.
Yeah.
Right. Because you have the family members, the friends, the event, the stress, who you are as a person, like everything is going to come out within those settings.
And it comes out naturally. People are behaving naturally. That camera, I call it my passport. It was my passport into my clients' lives. And a big part of that has to do with, of course, the trust that we build and whatnot, but also the fact that I'm not a counselor or therapist. I'm not carrying a tote board. I'm not there to judge, because the version that people present in a therapist's office is the version that they want to present, the version that they're comfortable with a therapist seeing.
No, that is true. And then I think the contrast is you're catching moments. And so there's a healthy boundary there and you're able to catch everything.
Yeah, you can see all of it, and you can see it unfold just normally. And so a big portion of my case studies that went into this research was just in observing my clients, just in observing the relationships of the people that were in front of my camera. And of course, everything is always confidential, and I'm not even looking for specifics. What I was looking for were nuances. So as I was developing the whole approach to understanding core values and approaching relationships from that side, I would look for visible cues. What does it look like? What do these core values look like in someone's actual behavior? And can I actually identify patterns? And I could. So I have several patterns here that I'm going to talk about.
Is it fair to say, like, in the traditional counseling, you're peeling layers, but in that setting, it's already peeled?
It's fully peeled, but you also have to know what to look for. You know what I mean? Like I remember when I was first kind of showing you the method and the approach, I would say, like, once you understand this, it's like seeing the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Like a client will literally say one thing and you will know exactly their background experiences, attachments, all the way through to like present value sets and exactly how to help them. And I remember a few months ago when we were going in through clinical trials where you called me and you're like, I'm seeing the Matrix, bro.
That's true. It all comes to life.
Yeah.
The green comes out, the numbers come out, and it's like, oh, this has meaning for me.
Yeah, because without the knowledge and without that framework, it's kind of just a behavior. But once you have that, then as you apply it, you're like, okay, I can actually understand what's going on. But you know what? Why don't we just start with number one?
Let's do it.
I got 10 of these, bro.
Do you want me to read it? So, number one, when someone takes the lead, walks in front, do they glance back?
Yeah, so this was one that I had in my notes that I would check off quite often. So, say for example, we're out and we're doing engagement photos, right? Or just couples portraits, whatever it might be. I would actually pay attention to when we get to a place that, there's oftentimes a steep hike to get to where we're going to shoot these photos. When we get to that area that's steep, does the person that's in front look back and glance at the other person? Because in a healthy functioning relationship, there's usually that sense of, we talk about regard. Regard is the key piece, the admiration, the respect, all those different things, the attraction, the love, everything is built in that regard. And if you care for that person that is with you, as you are encountering something difficult and challenging, glancing back would be natural, just to see if they're okay. Do they need guidance? Do they need help? But you'd be amazed at how often it does not happen.
That is fascinating. Yeah, because that's just a level of respect because it's semi-dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You're sharing a moment and you would just naturally want to look back. Are you okay? Maybe grab a hand or show some support. So if they're not doing that, then that shows that, man, there's like a very low level of respect. That totally makes sense.
And it could be, I want to say that none of these things by themselves are enough to kind of completely diagnose anything. They're just markers, right? You start adding up these markers, and then after 3, 4, 5 of them, then you have an indication of what's going on. A very common situation, for example, would be I would have my guy and my girl, and she'd be dressed in a nice dress with heels, and we'd be hiking down steep terrain. And oftentimes, the guy is so wrapped up in his own conversation, in his own mind, that he doesn't even look back. And it happened regularly. And then I would say, okay, that's a note. I want to see if I can find more examples of this as we go. And sure enough, you would find more examples of that, where they're in their own heads and completely disregarding the other person.
So it would correlate to other things. Is it fair to say, like, if they didn't look back, then they would, like maybe in conversations, they would just totally disregard them and what they have to say?
Yes. It would translate to not each and every time, right? But it would translate to those other behaviors as well. So if I would pick up on one little red flag, I would then go, okay, here's a marker. Let's start paying attention. Another example would be like a wave crashes and the guy picks up his stuff and moves, but then doesn't help her. So the same person that would not look back when the wave crashes near them kind of like takes care of himself and not her. And so I'm not, of course, I would never bring these things to their attention. It's not my place or my role for that. These are just markers,
No, but
data points.
But they're telling though.
For sure.
No, they're very telling. Can I ask you this? Was there ever a time where like they didn't look back, but then the rest of the time they were healthy? Was there ever one time?
Yes.
Oh,
Because
okay.
you can, for example, in that moment, you might be so caught up in something that you don't look back because maybe you yourself are trying to navigate something, or maybe you're having a conversation you don't even notice. You're navigating it so easily that you don't think about it. So in that moment, it is entirely possible that it's just one single instance of ignoring. I love that you asked that because, yeah, it's a marker. It's not you're looking for multiple pieces, not just one single one to make a judgment off of.
Now that makes sense. Or what if you're just really scared of heights or something?
Yeah,
Or you're just like really afraid. And so you're just hyper focused on that. And
totally.
yeah.
There can be a number of those things. But if you can line up 4 or 5 of those, then you're like, okay.
But that's a good indicator though.
For sure.
That's a really good indicator.
All right. You want to go to the next one?
Yeah. Number 2, how do they each behave around family and friends?
Yeah, this one was really interesting for me to watch because if one person is highly respectful towards their parents and the other person is highly dismissive, that's not a good sign because these are people that you should love and value, right? Regardless of how annoying your parents are, whatever it might be, their approach and engagement with their parents was, if it was not similar, like if they were both dismissive of their parents, then that's okay. If they were both
They share a
respectful of their
commonality.
parents, then that's okay. But when they're different, when they operate on different wavelengths, that's a potential difference in underlying core values, where it's like how they show their love and how they value long-term relationships in their lives fundamentally differ.
No, I agree with you. And then basically it's a happy moment, but it's a stressful moment. There's so much going on. So how you treat your family and friends is basically probably how you're going to treat your partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
they go hand in hand.
I'll give you an amazing example of this. And you can see it with their friends too, like their closest friends, right? You look at how they engage with their friends. A couple that I photographed, I want to say like 7 or 8 years ago, one of the healthiest relationships that I'd ever seen. Both, like, I was just so surprised at how both of these people are doctors and they're so incredibly genuine and kind. And I was first surprised by how he would behave because he was almost he's that person that would genuinely take interest in you when he's having a conversation with you and you felt like you were the center of his world in that moment. And he would do this with everybody around him, and it wasn't an act, it wasn't a show, because it was consistent over the course of, what I would come to find out, years, that he'd be doing this. But everyone loved and appreciated that kindness in him, and it wasn't that he was a people pleaser either. He just genuinely appreciated the people around him. And then I was very curious, does she behave the same way? So as I'm photographing her, she's walking around, she has the exact same approach with her friends. The same, like, oh my gosh, how's the family? And she knew all their kids by name, and she would be able to go through and I was sitting there going, these two are in complete alignment when it comes to their values. And it shows.
Well, I mean, I think the beautiful thing too is like if a person is really healthy or a couple's really healthy, they're not going to vary their behaviors from person to person, right? Whether it's friends, a person that you're talking to, someone that you're working with, they're just going to be who they are. And then when you're at home, you just get more of that.
Yeah.
Versus where there's this huge discrepancy of behaviors that lets you know that there's some things that need to be worked out.
For sure. The other beautiful piece of my laboratory as a wedding photographer is not only have I seen thousands of these relationships, but I get to follow up with them. So I get to see them, at the wedding, then maternity photos, and then family photos, and I get to follow up and have relationships with these people and see if those things if those markers held up over now the course of a decade. So now that specific couple that I'm talking about, that was 8 years ago, and I actually just hung out with them.
That's
They're
so
doing
cool.
fantastic. They're just as good as they were on day one. And it's that alignment in values, the way that they both perceive the world and the people around them.
That's amazing. Can I ask you another question? Were you ever like a counselor in a lot of these settings, or you had to offer advice or be a support system?
Only in cases that, yeah, every good wedding photographer will tell you that a huge part of their job is being a psychologist, basically an on-site, whatever you want to call it. If it's a bride whisperer or a groom whisperer or a mom whisperer, you are the person that has to help kind of keep calm the situations, because there's a lot of, planning and effort and things that can go wrong on the wedding day, and a lot of moments where you can get wrapped into that. And a good wedding photographer is going to kind of help encourage and support through those moments. But I'm not doing it. I'm never saying anything from what I notice. I'm saying something only when absolutely necessary. For example, if someone gets hung up on the fact that it's raining and in their mind, they never intended, this was an actual example. For this one wedding, it was raining and it was a beautiful wedding. And this couple was so genuine, so loving. They were later in their years. I think they're in their 40s getting married. For him, it was his second. For her, it was her first. And they had something really beautiful. And she was so hung up on the fact that it was raining and that the reception site had to be moved indoors and that it was getting muddy and all this stuff. And so in that moment, I said, I don't want you to even worry about it. In fact, what we're going to do is the exact opposite of worrying. You're going to grab your shoes, and I want you to barefoot it. We're going to get the whole wedding party around you while it's raining, and we're going to go on this muddy trail, and you guys are going to walk on this muddy trail and just enjoy the moment. It's raining on your wedding day. And I said, I promise you, when you look back on this wedding day, that will be your favorite photograph. And so we're on that mud, and she's looking at me like I'm crazy, and they start walking, and all of a sudden their friend cracks a joke, and now all of them, this group of 12 people, are laughing and they're having a good time. And she like holds up her shoes, and I'm sitting here shooting these images. And I had dinner with them a year later. I said, what was your favorite memory from the wedding day? And she goes, it was that walking in the mud. Like, that was my favorite moment. And it took me, she's like, I don't know what happened in that moment, but you brought me right back to what we were actually doing. And so if you are a wedding photographer and you're listening to this, I would highly advise against, if you start noticing unhealthy patterns of behavior, don't just go and say something. But if there is something that someone gets hung up on, those are the moments to kind of step in and kind of move them through. But yeah, that is a big part of the job.
Yeah, like literally, like it was counseling. You literally counseled them and gave an alternative, and let's refocus on what's important and let's make the most of that situation.
Yeah, but not based on what I see or what I want to share. It's based on what they need and what they need to be hearing, right?
You made lemonade out of lemons, man.
Nice.
Number three, uneven power dynamics. Does one person make all the decisions?
Uneven power dynamics does one, yeah. So when arriving, like let's say to any shoot or, a planning session or anything, it's normal for there to be an uneven power dynamic in certain areas because sometimes sometimes photography and the wedding itself is not really something that, I mean, just frankly, it tends to be the guys. The guys aren't necessarily as interested in, and so they will often defer to her, on those decisions, or they'll defer to the person that cares more, regardless of gender. It's just, it often happens to be the guy that's not that interested. That's normal. What's not normal is if that power dynamic carries across every aspect. So every decision that's being made, from, the clothes that they might be wearing down to simple things like who's going to put the baby in the car, who's going to take the baby out of the car, or when you can see that the relationship is dominated by one individual across every aspect. Where should we get dinner afterwards? What should we do this? That's another kind of marker.
No, I think that's a really good point because there's two types of power dynamics. You have symmetrical communication where there's an equal dynamic, and even if they're deferring, they're still going to be respectful to the partner. Whereas the other one is complementary communication, which is basically the power dynamic is so extreme. One person makes all the decisions, and then they're just expecting that other person to follow. So if that's showing throughout the dynamic, that's going to be a really tension filled dynamic.
Yeah, and within that, what you're saying there is really key, because complementary power dynamics are ones where there's no resistance, right? If it's like, I think we should go here for dinner, and you're like, yeah, that sounds great. There's no resistance in that. That's a complementary power dynamic where one person is willing and happy to defer. But it was the moments of resistance when it was like, put the baby in the car. I just did. Or I just put him in on the way here. Why don't you do it this time? Or it's like, how about we go to this place? No, I don't want to do that place. And then the other person rolls their eyes. Oh my gosh, like you got to make another thing difficult. You know what I mean? There are these little quips and comments that show resistance in the power dynamic. That was the bigger issue that I would notice.
No, and that's a good point because if it's complementary and it's extreme, it's going to lead to resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be a lot of like inside hatred toward one another.
And you
That
can see
comes
that.
out.
Yeah, you can see that resentment when they roll their eyes, when they,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like you always got to weigh in on everything.
You always win. Here we go again. The sarcastic
Yeah.
comments that come.
And
Yeah.
they're usually made as jokes because they're not going to, for the most part, they don't usually bring up any serious arguments in front of me, but they would say it as a joke. She's always got to have her way, or like, there he goes again, like that kind of stuff.
Can I ask you that should feel awkward like in those moments, no? Like do you feel a little uncomfortable when that happens?
You know what's funny? No, because in my head, it's data. I'm in my laboratory, right? This is like, for me, it was and still is incredibly fascinating. This is probably honestly the most enjoyable part of why I still love wedding photography, is because it's people. It's what I love, studying people and understanding psychology. What's funny is we had an incredibly uncomfortable couple. This is a couple years back, and this is a train wreck of a marriage. Everybody on both sides knows this is bad. His side, for the most part, they're showing up to support only because these friends and people have a relationship with his parents, because he himself is a highly toxic individual. She's super kind, people pleaser. That you can already see the dynamic kind of, narcissist to people pleaser sort of playing out. And her family and friends know it. She's so sweet. And everybody knows. And it is the most awkward and uncomfortable thing because this is a multi-day wedding and they are visibly fighting. And he'd bring up these really lame like issues and just cause problems after one after another. And everybody around her just be like, oh my gosh, it's happening again. And she would cry multiple days during like what's supposed to be the happiest days of her life, right? I've never had this before where my two of my team members go on day 2. They said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? This isn't fun. I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, why don't you look at it from a different perspective? Like right now we're watching, this is a, this is a master class on human psychology. And I taught them some of the basics. They go into day 2 and they come back and they're like, this is fascinating. It's like, yeah, when you know like why and what's going on, you stop feeling awkward and you just simply observe and kind of let it be.
I think that's a healthy boundary because I think naturally, like if it gets really tense, you just want to diffuse the tension or just want it to go away. But your approach is very scientific. Like, look, we're just observing everything and we're just going to do our job and we're going to make the best out of it. But this is what's happening.
I mean, that's kind of the job of a photographer too, right? Your job is to be there and to document what's authentic and happening. Granted, in those moments they're fighting, we're not taking pictures. So part of it is that you have to be comfortable in sitting in those moments and being okay to not always step in or to always, because if two people are fighting, it's not your place again. Unless you specifically have or know something to help diffuse the situation, it's not your place to step in and, start offering advice. You're the photographer.
Well, I think the other thing too is you're not creating a fantasy. You're just creating the reality of these real moments, which I think that's what makes it more beautiful.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, photographers might argue with you there that a lot of what we do is take what's, I would say my job is to take what's real and to make it look better. Other photographers who are strictly journalists, they believe that you shouldn't influence anything. So there are wedding photojournalists who will never direct or do anything whatsoever. They will only document what's happening. But most people want authenticity made to be more beautiful.
Got it.
Yeah. So
That's awesome. Next one. If one observes something interesting, does the other person take interest?
yeah, this one was a very visible one. This actually came from I was studying Gottman stuff way back, and this note actually came from his work and what they would observe. Yeah, him and his wife would observe basically like these moments where I think they called them connections, like these moments where you try to connect with the other person, to share something that you found interesting, to say, oh my gosh, look at the clouds, or oh, that's incredible, or whatever it might be, these moments to connect. Does the other person connect back? So that's what I was noticing in this one. And oftentimes they don't. So as much as it happens, it also doesn't happen. It could be a moment where he gets a text message and he's like, oh my gosh, I just landed this deal. And she doesn't even really know what he's doing, like, oh, cool, honey. Like this one? No, it's for something else. Like she has no clue what his job and career really is, right? Or it could be that he kind of comes up to this spot and goes, man, this is wild. I can't believe we're just standing here in Laguna Beach and looking over the clouds and this rock face. This is gorgeous. And she's on her phone.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. It goes back and forth, right? Where maybe she spots a whale, or we're going to a downtown location and she's like, oh, there's this incredible restaurant here. I got to take you to it. And he's like, uh-huh, cool.
Yeah.
Those are those moments where you can notice if they are pausing to connect.
Well, that shows the unequal emotional dynamic, right? Like for one person, if the focus isn't on them, I'm not really that interested in you. And then vice versa, like if it's more equal and it's healthy, they'll be interested in each other.
Yeah.
And then Gottman talks about the 10-to-1 ratio and the 15-to-1 ratio, which is basically if you really care about your partner, you're going to see them in a 10-to-1 ratio of like 10 good things to 1 bad thing, which shows interest and respect. And if it's 15-to-1, you really love and care about that person very much.
Yeah. You know what was interesting? Some of my most healthy couples, I want to see if you can guess who they were. Do you think, let's see, if I were to say, of my couples that are getting married, which ones more often than not would display healthy relationship characteristics?
In terms of professions or what?
In terms of, in terms of gender.
In terms of gender, like whether same sex, different sex?
Yeah.
I'd say same sex.
No. Oh, yes. I thinking in my head, no, I was expecting you to say the, what did you call it? Same sex versus what was the other one?
Heterosexual
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
dynamic. Yeah.
So yeah, my same sex couples were, I can't think of a single one that wasn't a healthy relationship dynamic. And I attributed that to the fact that to get to the place where they're getting married, they've gone through so much shit in their lives. They've gone through so much crap, and they have worked so hard on their own identities and who they are and what they want to be, that they're choosing to get married, and they fought all the resistance to get there. So everything would just line up. And it would be some of the most beautiful weddings that I would have photographed would be my same-sex couples. And it would just be across the board. Like I could ask, what does, for example, I'm going to make up some names. Tom and Jerry. Tom, what does Jerry like? What are the things that he appreciates? Jerry would list off Tom would list off just a whole list of things. And Jerry's like, yeah, that's spot on. Like they would know everything about each other, what they do, how they would take interest in all of it. They would have similar values, their approaches. It was fascinating to me to notice that.
Well, it just makes sense though, because from a societal standpoint, you didn't have the legal right to be married, right? So when they do make that commitment, it's real.
Yeah.
It's not this fantasy. It's not trying to overcompensate for everything. This is about us, and this is about loving each other, and this is what it stands for.
For sure.
Yeah.
And this isn't to say that same-sex couples in general are more healthy than hetero couples. That's not what we're saying at all. What I'm saying was that the ones that are at the point of marriage, see, my sample set are people that are getting married, right? So when you look at that sample set, I hate the word non-traditional, but any couple that was non-hetero, they were coming to the table with a very healthy foundation of their relationship.
Yeah, well, their intentions are pure, it seems like.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they have to be. Like, why would you get married otherwise, right? If you haven't defined what it means for yourself, why would you do it?
No, agreed. And then, sometimes it could be convoluted the other way around. So,
all right, let's do number 5, and then let's do a part 2.
Okay. Are jokes used to mask underlying frustrations?
That's a big one.
That's a huge one.
So I would often be, and this would happen at every shoot, I'll give you a few examples. Once I was photographing a family, and I asked her, what do you do for work? And he responds, and he goes, she spends my money. And I was like, okay. I kind of, you laugh because it's a sarcastic joke, right? But immediately I'm going red flag. And she kind of looked uncomfortable when he said that, And she goes, yeah, I'm trying some different like home businesses and I want to be an entrepreneur and stuff like that. But you could tell that was a point of resentment on both their parts for the way that he would, I mean, it just showed a lack of regard in general, like that he would say that and make that joke.
Well, I think the types of jokes are really important because in that one, there's truth behind it, and it's the pain of, man, you're blowing all our money.
Yeah.
And so it's not even funny. The whole intention is not funny versus like, oh, you love your sweets. Here's another one like that. There's a lightheartedness to the humor. But once you get into that, yeah, you're right. It's unhidden resentment, conflicts that they're just trying to mask.
Yeah. When you make jokes of things that are actually inner resentments, that's a really bad sign.
Yeah. I mean, I went to one wedding. This was a long time ago. And then the wife and then the wife's mother was like, oh yeah, ha ha ha, you're marrying someone that's never going to work, because at the time he didn't have a job, and it wasn't funny.
No.
Yeah.
It's brutally awkward.
Brutally awkward. And it was just like, oh, and that's when I was like, awkward. I want to get the hell out of here. It was,
yeah.
yeah.
And then sometimes, like I was at a wedding not so long ago where, the makeup artist actually asked the parents of the groom, tell us how you guys met and your love story. And the father goes, oh, she just wanted a green card to come to the States. And he laughs, and I'm sitting there like taking pictures of something else, and I'm like, I'm just going to pretend like I didn't even hear this. But the makeup artist got kind of uncomfortable. Oh no, I'm sure it was love, and the mom doesn't say anything, and dad kind of continues, no, I'm pretty sure it was just money and green card, and she's pretty. But in that joke is the way that he perceives the world.
Yeah, it's his truth.
It's his truth.
Yeah, he's just masking it.
And so in a lot of cases, these couples stay together. They do so not because it's a model relationship or because it's happy. They do so because, it's what they know. It's, the best thing that they feel like they can get. It's perhaps even arranged. It's, they think it's for the kids. There are a million reasons why people might choose to stay, but it doesn't mean that the relationship is healthy.
You know what's crazy is we talked about like marriage before and like how easy it is to get married. It's almost like the condition should be like before getting married, before making that decision, when you plan it, because all the truth is going to come out, then you make your decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird that you can pretty much, do anything else and have more challenges. Like getting your driver's license is more difficult than getting a marriage license. Creating a business is more difficult. Like just the paperwork that's involved in those things is more difficult than, there's all that process for these other areas that frankly don't have that much impact on your life compared to a marriage, which has a significant impact, and yet there's no due process whatsoever.
But it also shows like the correlation of like how this started for you. Like that's a huge correlate. It makes sense because you're seeing everything right in front of you. You're in this laboratory a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I really enjoy what I do. And, from the aspect of, I like creating, the creative aspect of photography was always appealing to me, but what meant more to me was creating something that had value. And so when I am able to document two people's genuine relationship and their family and their history, and that to me is meaningful. I know how to take pretty pictures, but it doesn't mean much unless there's something, and specifically I'm drawn toward that relationship aspect of photography. Like you could take pictures of anything.
Not to put you on the spot, but given what we're covering right now, what advice would you give to people that are in this space? And let's say things are not like they're looking at this list and they're like, okay, yeah, this is not good. This is not good. This is not good. What kind of advice would you give?
I mean, well, I would say that these are all markers, right? So the more of these that you start checking off, the more you urgently need to get some help, some professional guidance on the relationship, and find someone who's qualified. We've talked a lot about how you really need to find someone that's good and qualified.
Yeah, and at least don't brush this under the rug.
No, that's the worst thing you can do, because you sweep it under the rug, and it's not as if it's going to stop. Even if you say that these things don't matter, even if like I don't know what you would tell yourself. I'm going to power through it. These things don't matter, whatever it might be. You can fool yourself, but under the surface, it will still affect you. It will still damage the regard you have for the other person. It will still affect your relatability. It will lead to the exact same place. And eventually it's a breakdown. If you ignore it, it will lead to a breakdown or just misery within your relationship.
And I think it's fair to say the rationalization of, oh, this is just because of the event and it's stressful. No, these are indicators that this is things to come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you look at those, again, what we're looking at is like these markers that would be present at each of these moments. And sure, the wedding day is stressful, but if you can identify the same marker on the wedding day as you could at any other day of the week, that's there.
Yeah, no, makes sense, man. This is why I need a part 2, man.
Well, this one's going to be like, I think, well over an hour long if we just keep it as a part 1. So why don't we do 5 in this episode, and then we'll do 5 in the next episode. We'll do a part 2 to this one. And if you guys enjoyed this podcast, we would love for you, if you want to help us out, jump onto the iTunes store, leave a review for 12 Week Relationships. Of course, we appreciate if it's a 5-star review. If you want to write something there too, Glen and I actually read them all. Really makes us happy to see. We have, I think, almost 40 reviews now in the store, and that helps everybody just kind of know that this is a valuable place. We hope it's a valuable podcast for each and every one of you. With that, we also want to mention that if you want to look at one-on-one coaching with Dr. Glen, you can join the waitlist at 12weekrelationships.com. You can also find our newsletter there, so you can stay up to date on everything that we do and also get tips into your inbox each week. I'm actually currently writing all of our newsletters. I'm writing I want these to be like custom. You know what I mean? I want them to, I don't want to just, this is what happened this week on the podcast type thing. I want it to be like, here is something that I found meaningful this week. This is what I would want to know. And so I'm handwriting these and getting them all ready to get going. So
Oh, it's validating.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it for us. We'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thank you.